It's a pleasure to be back once again with our partner ATR in Ukraine to speak to some individuals. This particular individual is of great interest, I think you'll see once the conversation begins. Ruslan Zhadnov is the head of the NGO Crimea Active, originally from Sevastopol, currently actively helping with the Ukrainian army. Welcome, Ruslan. Nice to see you.
Спасибо, взаимно.
Thank you, the same here.
From your perspective, as both an activist and someone actually living in Kyiv, how would you describe the current humanitarian situation in Ukraine? What changes have you observed over the past recent months, both in terms of challenges and I would say resilience?
I suppose the resilience of the people has remained, it hasn't changed. Because the people are the creatures who get used to whatever difficulties that may come their way. The same goes for Ukrainians, even perhaps more so. We have been at the state of war since 2014, so we are kind of used to it. But year on and on, the situation is getting more difficult. But anyway, we're enduring. We are really an endurant nation, so I suppose everything will be all right. I don't see a super critical situation unfolding in Ukraine. When it's night, shelling, people have to go to the shelters. In the morning, we wake up, we still get into our cars, we get stuck in traffic jams, it's all right. But if you compare the situation now to the situation back in 2022, when half of the Kyiv fled from the city and it was possible to walk in the thoroughfares because there were no cars whatsoever, everyone was in a shock. But at that time, we didn't have any shaheds, there were very few shellings. But now that we have hundreds of these missiles and shaheeds attacking us nearly every night, we are living through this Star Wars, so people are kind of used to it. They still wake up in the morning and go to work, and they're treating it as something customary. It's a very bad thing to happen, of course. But the people are, let me repeat myself, are the kind of creatures that can get used to whatever.
Explain for our viewers and the listeners, what does your organization actually do?
Our organization, its mainstream of work is rendering assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine. We began to do it actively in the first months into the war, and we have been doing this throughout the full-scale invasion. We were probably the first volunteers, military volunteers in Ukraine, because we were the first to be confronted with the occupation of Crimea, and multiple members of our organization back in Crimea had to travel from one military unit to another one. Back in 2015, we brought in Ukrainian journalists from the mainland Ukraine for them to report about the situation. Now perhaps it sounds pretty mundane and ordinary, but at that time there was a great headhunting in a way on Ukrainian journalists. So bringing Ukrainian journalists into those military units, it was a real exploit. We also tried to deliver any kind of humanitarian assistance to our military personnel, bringing the journalists, again I repeat myself, but then time came for us to leave our native Sevastopol, because all pro-Ukrainian activists were being persecuted and repressed, and their intensity only increases every year. So virtually all of the members of our organization fled Sevastopol. Some went to Europe, part of them settled in Ukraine, and when in 2022 the full-scale invasion started, again, we began to write and call each other, and we realized it was the only possibility for Ukraine, the only chance for Ukraine to reclaim the peninsula of Crimea, because all of these stories about diplomacy are, so-so. It's a wishy-washy story. But now we Crimean residents, we are free to act at our liberty. Therefore, we joined efforts and we try to mobilize as best as we can the people in Europe, some of the businessmen in Europe trying to procure different things for the military. We try to bring all of these procured things into Ukraine, meeting all of this support on the border of Ukraine, and we try to promptly deliver it to the front line of Ukraine. So ever since the first days of the full-scale invasion, our aim was to do our best to help our army to liberate our motherland.
I understand that you are originally from Sevastopol in Crimea. How has living as an internally displaced person shaped your advocacy for your group?
Так, чуть-чуть не понял вопроса. Что именно вы имеете в виду? Можете...
I kind of misunderstood your question. What exactly do you mean by that?
Okay. Well, you are not living now in Crimea, correct?
Сейчас нет, я в Киеве проживаю.
Not now. I'm based in Kyiv.
So, in essence, you are what we call in English an internally displaced person. You're living somewhere where you're not from. And I'm wondering, how has that fostered or encouraged your advocacy for your group?
Ну, смотрите, я не вижу в этом проблемы.
Look, I see no problem in that or about that because being the residents of Ukraine, we always felt at home. So I cannot say that I feel somewhat different when now I'm based in Kyiv. We have always been one single country. And we citizens of Ukraine, we never divided ourselves into Crimeans or mainland Ukrainians. This was always a reality due to different kinds of political divisions, when lots of politicians tried to gain different political gains during election campaigns. My tradition and my friends used to have a tradition. It's something that we concocted for ourselves, not to celebrate New Year at home, but instead take it and celebrate it in Lviv, the west of Ukraine, the Carpathians, or Kyiv. So with my friends, and then later on together with my family, I have been traveling vastly around Ukraine. The only thing I'm regretting, I wasn't able to go to Donetsk. I planned to go there back in 2014, but blimey, it didn't work out because hostilities started there. But anyway, we've always felt at home, no matter where we were in Ukraine. Even speaking Russian, I never felt that I was somehow, felt or was mistreated somehow because politicians would say that Russian is not welcome in the west of Ukraine. It's true, of course, I'm not in Crimea right now. I'm in Kyiv instead, because I love the sea. I'm used to the smell of the south coast of Crimea, and I will never be able to mistake it for anything else. So Crimea for me is a wrangling issue, and I'm not ready to discuss any kind of concessions in terms of Crimea, because this is my motherland. 2.5 million Ukrainian citizens are based there, so how can we discuss any kinds of concessions with our enemy? Therefore, once again, it's not a problem for me, no matter where I'm based in Ukraine.
No, so true. That's so true. I know that you maintain an active presence on social media platforms to share updates and insights about your work. How has the digital communication become essential to your advocacy? What role does it play in keeping the people there connected with you?
This
has played a crucial role and a significant one because, unfortunately, work of the government, unfortunately, in terms of information, particularly targeting Crimea, is something which is a great miss for the government of Ukraine. That's why observing the situation from a side, I don't see that the government are working very actively and efficiently in this respect. Therefore, as a common citizen of this country, I decided to undertake it and do it in the social media and social networks. Let me put it this way. When I began to tackle social networks and promote the idea of Crimea there, people began to subscribe to me, and I began to communicate with people, complete strangers to me, across the full board of Ukraine. And something which was a very nice surprise for me was to see that so many people have unfortunately escaped Crimea, but they have been scattered all over Ukraine. And these people feel sort of like deserted. Because on the one hand, the government seems to be doing something in terms of Crimea, but it's not as efficient as we would like it to be. Therefore, having accumulated this movement of people who have been scattered all over Ukraine and world over, we began to align and establish these connections and communication. Additionally, Crimean people who are still there in Crimea, taking all of these risky factors, they still keep reading what we have to post. And honestly, communicating with people who are still based in Crimea, they would speak very openly to me and say, maybe you can tell us some more bloggers who are also writing and speaking about Crimea. And I don't know anyone. Actually, this is a very hard point. Very little work is being done on Crimea. That's why my organization and I decided to use this informational space with the information and messages about Crimea. So we use various networks. And now for a few months, I have been also doing live broadcasts with people from Crimea and Crimean residents who are based in different places of Ukraine. And we are getting a lot of positive feedback. And another thing to mention, some of the Crimean residents started to forward very useful information via social networks to our military personnel. This is a very fine instrument with the help of which we are also helping our special services, intelligence services, and the military. So I think it's a great thing. It's cool that we are working along these lines, and we are not planning to stop.
Well, that's fantastic. Ruslan, one final question to you. What specific actions or even support systems do you believe are most urgently needed to better serve the immediate needs of those people who have been displaced, who have not in their homes, but have moved around? I love what you say, that no matter where you are Ukrainian and everyone is united. But I'm sure there are certain things that we might need to consider or even promote to better serve these folks.
Важный момент номер один, я вам честно скажу.
Number one point, honestly speaking, now that I have been communicating with the Crimean residents, is legal aid. This is something which is unfortunately lacking. Some Crimean organizations that we have in our country, they have to be able to deliver free legal aid and consultations for Crimean residents, particularly for those who are still based in Crimea and are planning to move out. People recently have been writing a lot to me concerning documents, because we have a lot of young people, Ukrainians, there who don't even have a Ukrainian passport. This is the 12th year into occupation, and the people who went to the first grade at school there in Crimea in 2014, they have already graduated from schools. So in fact, what we have right now is a whole generation of young people who have grown under isolation and the Russian occupation, and they are kind of, deserted by the Ukrainian government. And it's very good that a lot of them are still very supportive of Ukraine when I talk to them, and they ask us and approach us about how documents could be issued to them and how to leave Crimea. Now that we are here in Ukraine, we are used to be so well versed and to read so much about the news. Here in Ukraine, domestic and international, and especially international news, American news, is very closely watched. no matter who you ask, people will immediately tell you what's happening in the US. So everyone is well versed and well read. But Crimean residents, they feel the situation is tightening ever more year after year. They're in under information isolation. Every connection has been severed for them, and the situation is only getting worse. Plus, the Russian propaganda is intense, being dumped on these people. And I understand them perfectly well, that they find themselves in the middle of this not very nice situation, to put it softly. Therefore, they approach us to get any kind of clarifications. For example, the organizations based at the governmental level dealing with Crimean issues, unfortunately, they are not that willing to help Crimean residents, and different NGOs step in instead. And if we have enough expertise, then we can offer different kind of consultations for these people online. So something that we would like to have is at least legal support. We are not even asking any material support to be offered. Understandably, now in the 21st century, everyone is responsible for supporting and earning their own livelihoods. But in terms of legal consultations, that's something which is sorely needed, and we would like it to have more of that.
Very good. Ruslan, thank you so much for taking the time. We pray for you. We pray for all of the Ukrainian people that there will be an end to this occupation, which frankly should never have happened from the beginning. God bless you, sir, and thank you.